Okay, the menstrual cycle. Fairly long paragraphs here. A lot of information, but what I want to focus on, and I think it'll be best if you focus on these. There are a couple of tables in this section. Table 22.3 and these two, or this one um, figure. We're going to look closely at these two things, and then a good summary is here, table 22.4. So we're going to look through all of it, but those two tables and those figures are what are going to be, I think, most helpful, and that's where I'm going to focus primarily. So, menstrual cycle characterized by regular recurring changes in the endometrium, again, the inner lining of the uterus, the womb, which culminate in menstrual bleeding. These cycles usually begin close to age of 13. I've heard of girls starting as young as 8, and some not having their first period till they're 15 or 16. So it changes. Female's first cycle is called menarche, and that occurs after the ovaries and other organs mature and begin responding to certain hormones. And then the hypothalamus secretes gonadotropin releasing hormone that stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. We've seen what those do. In a young female, the estrogens will stimulate development of the various secondary sex characteristics. Estrogens secreted during subsequent menstrual cycles continue development of the traits and maintain them. So here's the hormonal control of female secondary sex characteristics. So the hypothalamus secretes the GnRH that stimulates the anterior pituitary gland, which secretes FSH and LH. FSH stimulates maturation of a follicle. Granulosa cells of the follicle begin to produce and secrete estrogens. The LH will stimulate certain ovarian cells to secrete estrogen precursor molecules. Now, precursor is a starting material. Estrogens are responsible for development and maintenance of most of the female secondary sex characteristics, and they also cause the endometrium to thicken. Concentrations of androgen affect other secondary sex characteristics, including skeletal growth and growth of hair. We've seen that already. And then progesterone from the ovaries will affect cyclical changes in the uterus and the mammary glands. All right, I want to skip through this part. I do believe we're just going to, it'll be easier to see it down here on this figure. So let's look right here. So ovarian activity, and you see we have a 28-day cycle shown here. And so early in the cycle, now day 1 of the menstrual cycle is the first day of a period. Okay, and we see that LH in the sort of peachy color and follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH in the blue, are playing a role in this. And this is development of the follicle. So you have an antral follicle with an antrum. You can kind of see its development until it's mature here at around day 11. So the FSH has stimulated this follicle to develop. Then, right here, between about day 12, 13, somewhere right in there, there is suddenly a surge of LH. luteinizing hormone. That causes, first of all, ovulation, the release of the oocyte from the follicle. Now, the remains of the follicle here, under the influence of luteinizing hormone, form this temporary gland on the ovary called a corpus luteum. Corpus means body, lutea referring to yellow. And we're going to see how this is going to secrete hormones. And it will degenerate and eventually form just basically a scar called a corpus albicans. Okay, so now if we look down here, I'm going to try to keep that timeline up here. Well, they have it at the bottom as well, but still. So what we see here through this area is thickening of the endometrium. That's what this is supposed to represent. And as it's thickening, I'm going to move this a little bit. We call this the proliferative phase. Okay. Now, remember that days 1 through 5 are considered the menstrual phase. All right, so day 1 starts the cycle, first day of a period. And what's happening is the endometrium that had been growing thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. Then if fertilization does not occur, then we're going to see a drop-off of hormones coming from the corpus luteum. And that will allow or cause the blood vessels in the endometrium to begin to constrict. That will cut off the blood supply. That tissue will begin to die and be shed. They use the term slough off. So when the period starts, day 1 through day 5, we're in our monthly period. Now, look at the estrogen and progesterone levels up here. Estrogen in this sort of peachy color, progesterone in the green. So you notice that the estrogen is higher than progesterone, and it's going to peak right here, right before ovulation at around day 13 or so, 13, 14. Now the estrogen is causing the endometrium to get thicker, to proliferate. Now, after ovulation, you notice that the estrogen level drops down a little bit and the progesterone level comes up and becomes dominant. Now, progesterone causes the endometrium to become more vascular. There'll be more blood vessels and more glandular. So these glands that you see here, these openings, this is where an embryo will go down into these and implant. Now, in the absence of a pregnancy, if the secondary oocyte does not get fertilized, then this is going to change. You see this drop off here of estrogen and progesterone. That coincides with degeneration of the corpus luteum. Okay, so this is a cycle that does not include fertilization of the secondary oocyte. This does not include pregnancy. This will just keep repeating. Now, here is all of that summarized. And this is, again, it's a good idea to read the full paragraphs, get a little bit of detail there, but this is the meat of it. Anterior pituitary gland secreting FSH and LH, FSH stimulating maturation of the follicle. The granulosa cells of the follicle produce and secrete the estrogens, which maintain the secondary sex characteristics and cause the endometrium to proliferate, to thicken. The anterior pituitary gland then will release a surge of LH, which will interact with FSH and progesterone and prostaglandins and plasmin and proteolytic enzymes, all these different things that work together to lead to ovulation. After ovulation, The granulosa and thecal cells, remember those from the follicle, become the corpus luteum, and it will secrete estrogens and progesterone. Now, the estrogens will continue to stimulate uterine wall development, endometrium. The progesterone will stimulate the endometrium to become glandular and vascular. The estrogens and progesterones also make their way through the bloodstream to the hypothalamus and pituitary gland and inhibit secretion of FSH and LH. Now think about why that would be. You've just ovulated. You need to see if that secondary oocyte gets fertilized or not. If it does, then we do not want to secrete more FSH to stimulate another follicle to finish its development, because we've done the goal here. We've achieved the goal. We have released a secondary oocyte and it has been fertilized. Okay? So the estrogen and progesterone are going to inhibit secretion of FSH so that we don't start developing. Actually, this happens even if you don't get pregnant. We don't want to start another follicle until we see if the secondary oocyte that we ovulated does get fertilized. Okay? If the secondary oocyte is not fertilized, then the corpus luteum will degenerate and no longer be able to secrete estrogen and progesterone. So they cannot go up here and inhibit secretion of FSH and LH anymore. So as the concentration of hormones from the corpus luteum declines, the blood vessels in the endometrium will constrict. The uterine lining will disintegrate and slough off, producing menstrual flow. Also, the anterior pituitary gland will no longer be inhibited, so it will start secreting FSH and LH again, and the cycle repeats. So that, to me, is the best way to look at this. I skipped over these paragraphs right through here. I think hopefully if you'll read over those, it may fill in whatever gaps there are. But this right here, this is a great view of what's going on and how the hormone levels play a part. And then it's all summarized very concisely right here in this table. So that's going to be the main thing I would tell you to look at. And that's going to do it for this section.